Welcome to Larry the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. For today's episode, I have a special guest with me, Martin Popoff. Martin is no stranger here at the Lair. He's been here a bunch of times, but if you don't know Martin, he is an author that has well over 100 books on heavy metal and hard rock. He has a YouTube channel, The Contrarians, where him and his co-hosts discuss dark horse albums, and he has an awesome podcast called History in 5 Songs. And Martin and I today are going to be discussing honorary new wave of British heavy metal bands. I'm going to get into the explanation of that in a little bit, but I want to tell you what inspired this topic was I've been just finished not too long ago some books that Martin put out not too long ago. Wheels of Steel, the explosive early years of the new wave of British heavy metal. This Means War, the sunset years of the new wave of British heavy metal. These are both awesome timeline books where Martin takes us through the timeline, significant albums and events that took place in the history of the new wave of British heavy metal. And we also have Smoke and Valves, A Headbanger's Guide to New Wave of British Heavy Metal Records. These are all heavy metal albums in 7 inches and the various artist compilations where Martin gives them a rating and gives us some thoughts on these. These are all available at martinpopoff.com. I will be leaving a link to Martin's website down below, as well as links to Martin's YouTube channel and his podcast. So Martin, thank you for joining me again here at the Lair.
No worries. Yeah, this will be fun.
All right. So what we're thought of for this episode was, and this was inspired by Martin's book. As I was reading Martin's books, he would often mention some bands that were non-British bands, but that could be thought of as new wave of British heavy metal bands. They were from other countries, but maybe they were accepted for whatever reason. Their sound made them fit in with the new wave of British heavy metal. Maybe the N.W.O.B.H.M fans just embraced them and put their names on the back of their jean jackets or whatever. But we felt that they were kind of honorary new wave of British heavy metal bands. So let's, Martin, what would you say the new wave of British heavy metal, 1977, 1978, when does it really start kicking into gear, would you say?
No, I'd say later than that. I mean, I'd say 79, mid 79. It really picks up there's a lot of milestone things happening, February 1980 kind of thing. But 79, we get Samson and Saxon and Motorhead's well on its way. That's the biggest debate. I mean, I have this debate all the time with people on Facebook. People go really crazy about whether Motorhead belongs in the new wave of British heavy metal or not for Honorary. I know we've got a theme going here where these are bands not from Britain, but yeah, there's a whole nother discussion that way. But no, I'd say, late 79, Maiden Soundhouse tapes, that kind of era up until, as I closed off in those books, I think the last year I included in there was 1984. But, depending on how purist you are, a lot of people want to end it even earlier than that, right? 80, 82, 83, pick your year. But I basically think of, solidly the very beginning of 1980 through to the end of 1984. That's what I consider the thing.
Okay, right. And, you mentioned the Soundhouse. Neil Kay was a famous DJ that used to play all these bands. And that's how some of these honorary bands did get heard over there. He used to have a charts that he ran, and all the young metalheads would come out and with their cardboard guitars, banging their heads to Neil Kay's Soundhouse charts and everything, and all the new wave of British heavy metal bands coming up in Britain. Plus, there would be other bands that people would hear. So we thought it would be fun to sort of discuss some bands, non-British bands that maybe fit into this mold, the sound of the new wave of British heavy metal, which I guess I would describe it as being, it's metal, but it's got sort of a pub biker feel to it. Sometimes it's usually aggressive, it's usually fast. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other kinds of bands doing different things within the new wave of British heavy metal sound. But do you have anything you would add to what is the sound of the new wave of British heavy metal? Kind of hard to say because, again,
if I could be bold and basically simplistic and generalizing and crude about it, I think you could probably distill it right down to Judas Priest. Essentially, the mean median average of Sad Wings through Hell Bent for Leather. That's your template right there. I mean, there are a bunch of other second wave bands and first wave bands. Second wave bands I consider like, the bands that were coming up that were baby bands, say 74, 75, 76. You can name those, but they would be kind of like slightly off base and off topic. And I think if you just say, the likes of Sin After Sin, Stained Class, Hellbent for Leather, that's really your template right there. I often call like the new wave of British heavy metal. There's a hub and there's spokes going off in various directions. But if you want to really, really just distill it down to something, Judas Priest.
I would agree with that for sure. Okay, well, what do you got for your first pick, Martin?
Okay, well, it's funny. I looked at these and I look at your list, and my list I feel like is the ones where I'm going to be really contrarian to bring in our YouTube channel. Mine are more. I think you have more of the youthful end of the bands, and we left the more contentious ones that would need some serious, contrarian arguing to describe as part of the new wave of British heavy metal. So that said. So yeah, I have the older bands, I think, just kind of in general here. So my first pick is AC/DC. Now, why is AC/DC part of the new wave of British heavy metal as an honorary band? Again, we're theming this as bands that are not from the UK that are honorary. We could have a whole separate discussion on bands who are from the UK that are honorary. Motorhead being one, Judas Priest being the other one that is a big debate, right? But AC/DC. So why AC/DC? So first of all, they more or less broke in the Western world out of the UK. They were signed to Atlantic out of the UK. So they're essentially more of a UK situation, in terms of a major label situation versus the US. Obviously they're an indie band out of Australia on Albert Records. Then they essentially moved to the UK and spent a lot of their time there. So UK, London area became sort of their second home away from home. Highway to Hell is partially recorded in the UK. A lot of their early Western touring, this is where they had sort of their stronghold. Bon Scott died in the UK. Obviously Back in Black is recorded at Compass Point in the Bahamas. For Those About to Rock is recorded in Paris. But essentially, this is a band that if you didn't know better and if you didn't read about it and if you weren't paying a lot of attention, you could have almost mistaken them for a band out of the UK. And let's not forget, finally, that the Young family, the Young clan, lots and lots of them emigrated from Scotland to Australia. So they're originally from the UK anyways. And then finally, their new lead singer, right in the heat of the new wave of British heavy metal, 80, 81 coming up, is from the UK. He's not even an Australian. He's from Newcastle, Brian Johnson. So there are a lot of ties. And then later their new bassist is from the UK, right? And then later still, you've got Stevie Young, who was in the Starfighters band, yeah. who was a band that stayed. That this is a Young that didn't emigrate to Australia, and they had this band Starfighters, who were considered a little bit of a new wave of British heavy metal band, a little ancillary, a little more roots rocking. They had an album called Starfighters, and then they had In Flight Movie. So lots of reasons. So AC/DC's there, and then and they've got support bands who are part of. I always argue that this is part of being an honorary new wave of British heavy metal band. When you go out on tour and you have bands on the undercard who are sort of part of the scene as well. So yeah, lots of reasons to put AC/DC in here, I think. And granted, obviously the reason you don't put them here is they're not from the UK, essentially. They're from Australia, but their albums go back to 74, 75, 76. Highway to Hell is already, depending on how you count, sort of their fifth or sixth album. Right.
Yeah, and I would say even with their sound, they sort of fit into this. I mentioned earlier, this sort of pub rock. AC/DC is this high energy, even though they're a massive stadium band, and even by 79, you know, they're starting to break out big, and certainly by 1980, then they're a huge affair. But the core of their sound, you know, let's say Let There Be Rock, you know, era of the band is this sort of high energy, straight ahead rock and roll, kind of in your face, designed for, it goes over just as well in a small pub over a couple pints as it does in a stadium, you know. And I think that that's the appeal to AC/DC. They don't have they're not bloated like ELP or Led Zeppelin with big long guitar solos and stuff like that. You know, it's music that the Punters, you know, could embrace. So,
yep.
All right, cool. Well, AC/DC is going to show up as a theme, as a sort of a connecting thread through a couple of my bands. So I'll start with Trust. They're a French band from France. And they got their start pretty early. They were formed in 1977 when they released a single. They're kind of a punky, they have sort of an energy, hard energy to them. Maybe if you wanted to make like an MC5 or The Damned a little bit, but they also have a little bit of this AC/DC sound to them, hard rocking sound. And the AC/DC connection goes even beyond that. They did a cover of Ride On their 1979, on Trust's 1979 debut album. They did a version of Ride On. And a weird little historical thing, the last known recording of Bon Scott is of him singing with Trust, them playing Ride On live somewhere, and Bon must have jumped up on stage and sang it with him. Supposedly Bon had a relationship with the band, was going to help them translate some of their music into English, one of their other records. That should be noted also that I believe all their stuff, or most of their stuff, is in French, I think.
I think they did an English version of an album. And just one other kind of finer point, I believe that whole Ride On with Bon, their situation was in like a rehearsal situation.
Oh, okay. Good. It wasn't in a live thing. Yeah. Okay. And then the album that I guess you would recommend from them would be 1980 Repression. And that has the song Antisocial on it, which would later on be covered by Anthrax. It's mostly a kind of hard edge punky affair. The singer, Bernie Von Voisin, he was kind of known, I guess, for his political, social conscious lyrics, but there are moments where it sort of has an AC/DC vibe to it. There's a song called, probably not pronouncing it correctly, Passé, which translates to Walk Alone, which is a real rock and roll damnation vibe to it. So I think because of this sort of AC/DC connection, because of the high energy vibe of them, yet with the power chords and everything, you know, they're not quite punk, but the AC/DC connection and the energy vibe of their song maybe endears them to fans of the new wave of British heavy metal. It should also be noted that some of these bands, you know, at this point in time, there aren't a whole lot of other bands doing this kind of sound in some of these countries. So these bands get recognized just because, you know, they're sort of the only band in town doing this kind of sound. So, all right, there's my first pick, is Trust.
Yeah, and France and Paris isn't that far away from London. I mean, it's the closest country, you know. But one of the problems with the French bands is that they were always one of the countries that was most insistent on singing in French, which limited one of my favorite bands from that whole scene, Warning. Oh my God, that first Warning album is so good, but it's in French. Sortilege, on the other hand, had French language versions, but they also did their stuff in English. And that Metamorphoso, whatever it's called, album is an absolute metal classic. So that's a French band. H-Bomb. People talk about the French bands as having a little bit of a biker vibe as well. But Warning has more or less like a thinking man's AC/DC vibe, and Sortilege is more like a little more fancy, like Iron Maiden. A little amazing stuff. So, all right, my second choice, Sammy Hagar. This is kind of a funny one because this fits in the whole Capitol riot thing. Sammy Hagar toured, Riot supported. There was the whole thing about getting Riot signed over in the UK, the whole petition thing. But anyway, Sammy is he toured a lot there. This falls into the line of Sounds and Kerrang and all those writers over there liking what was called W.M.H.M. They loved softer, more melodic American rock. It's a little bit of more being enamored with the grass is greener, and they felt like they didn't get enough of it over there, or it wasn't done well enough. So they always wrote up all these bands, Night Ranger and Journey. They loved all this semi-mellow stuff. Pomp rock was another thing, and Sammy kind of fit into that. Sammy is a weird sort of he's almost like a Midwest rocker, John Mellencamp of hard rock. It's almost like a slightly heavier version of Bryan Adams on the later albums. This is a little more heavier and straightforward. So this is the 79 album. So yeah, April 80, he toured there, Riot supporting. He didn't tour in 81. He toured in 82, January of 82 with Grand Prix supporting. That was the Bernie Shaw band. I think Bernie's already gone by then, maybe. Anyways, Bernie Shaw went on to Uriah Heep. He's actually from Victoria, BC, but he was in Grand Prix for a bit there, and then in Uriah Heep. But they were your classic melodic, keyboardy new wave of British heavy metal band. He also recorded a few albums there. Sammy Hagar and Musical Chairs both have Hypnosis cover art because they were recording one or both of them there. I can't remember exactly, but they did record in London as well. And Sammy is just kind of like he's a good businessman. He's a good opportunist, and he put himself out more, and the label did as well in the ads. He put himself out more as a hard rock artist when it came to this thing. It was almost like, yeah, I'll have a slice of that new wave of British heavy metal thing. A lot of other American bands weren't as cognizant or on the ball about it, but he took advantage of it and had a bit of success over there as being kind of like a hard rocking Midwest rocker guy.
Yeah. All right. Well, you mentioned Riot. I'll go to Riot next. They're my other pick. And they're sort of the East Coast here. Sammy Hagar over on the West Coast. We're going to move to the East Coast. Riot is one of these bands that was embraced in the UK really before they were embraced in the US. They started, I don't have their first album, but their first album, Rock City, came out in 1977. So they were really early to this sort of hard driving, hard rock, heavy metal sound. It was put out on an indie label, which is a big thing in the new wave of British heavy metal, kind of putting stuff out on smaller labels. Features the awesome guitar playing from Mark Real and the vocals from Guy Speranza. Their Rock City debut album is a very well produced record for a debut album. A lot of these new wave of British heavy metal bands, their early stuff, their early singles and stuff like that can be kind of lo-fi, but Rock City just sounds fantastic. It's real clean. It's real punchy. Riot kind of arrives on the scene, maybe not 100% fully formed, but pretty gosh darn close to it. They really have their sound kind of coming right out of the gate, which for 77 is pretty impressive. You might compare them to some of the West Coast bands like Montrose or Yesterday and Today, but they have more of a hard rocking East Coast, a little bit more of an aggressive edge to their sound, for me at least. The 77 Rock City, the title track is awesome. Warrior, Overdrive, Tokyo Rose, all great stuff. Then they go on in 79 to release Narita, Waiting for the Taking, 49er, Kick Down the Wall, just again, fantastic, hard driving, hard rocking stuff. This is the one that probably people would recognize the most. It should also be noted, they've got this Baby Seal mascot here, Fire Down Under. This is from 81. The absolute metal classic, in my opinion, song Swords and Tequila. Feel the Same, the title track, song Outlaw, just all fantastic stuff. Then Guy Speranza would leave the band, and Rhett Forrester would come in on vocals for Restless Breed, and the band would sort of start moving in a slightly different direction. But I think because of their sound, because they're there so early, there's so few bands in the US doing this cleanly, this with this much confidence, this kind of sound. And the fact that, again, they're sort of embraced in the UK and embraced in Japan before they were in the States. In a lot of ways, they never really had a big break in the States. It was really the UK and Japan that embraced them more. So that's how Riot, Honorary new wave of British heavy metal band.
Yeah, I love Riot. Our bar band in the 80s, Torque, we played Road Racing and Outlaw.
Nice.
And I did a Riot book, of course. But yeah, I mean, boy, yeah, Fire Down Under. You nailed it there. You hit it on the head. I mean, they're just basically there was practically it's almost comical how little hard rock and heavy metal there is out of all of America. I'd say 78, 79, 80 kind of thing. All of it was coming from elsewhere, but Riot was so heavy on Narita and Fire Down Under, and so fully formed, as you say, that the UK just completely embraced them, because it's uncommon having something that heavy, but it's also really, really good, and it's also from the States, so it had all these different magical things going on about it, rather than these bands putting out their indie singles that are buddies of yours from high school and stuff. There's no magic to them, right? They're just your buddies, right? But there's magic to a band from way across the Atlantic doing this, and doing it so well, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, my next choice is this is a pretty far-flung one, but I'll explain. So Scorpions. They're obviously from Germany. This is their, the album that fits right into the new wave of British heavy metal. You go Love Drive 79 into Animal Magnetism 1980, and they're getting a simpler sound. It's the second one of the Matthias Jabs era. They're hitting you straight between the eyes with these good hard rocking simple sort of albums. This is a very, very uniform album throughout. It's got one ballad, and everything else on it is pretty much mid metal, meat and potatoes metal sort of thing. It's obviously less Hendrixy and obscure than the Uli John Roth stuff, but they fit in here because they're essentially a second wave band. I mean, Rudolph likes to talk about them starting all the way back in 1964 or 65, but really, their first album is, I think it's 72 for Lonesome Crow, but we're up to the fifth or sixth at this point. But they're essentially a second wave band. I mean, they start really coming onto the consciousness more or less with Virgin Killer, I would say, in 76. But they are the building blocks, the cornerstones that don't have to go all the way back to the first wave of the 1970 bands. So the younger Punters are this is like an older band, but not a super, super old band for them. And it's exotic. They're coming from Germany. There's nobody, this cool or this heavy coming out of Germany. They also played the UK a lot. They had 27 UK shows roughly in 1980, bunch of dates in 82. You get into Blackout. Now Scorpions have been around forever, and they've got 20 or whatever albums, but Blackout is almost considered their greatest album of all time, or it is by many, many people. Probably if you took a poll, it would win right now. And that's a 1982 album. So it's right in the thick of the new wave of British heavy metal. So they're making their best material at this time, and they're participating. They're touring there. They've got the undercards with new wave of British heavy metal bands supporting them. They played Monsters of Rock in 1980, kind of a cornerstone new wave of British heavy metal moment with, bringing in Riot. April Wine is there. I almost picked them as one of these honorary bands from elsewhere. They're from Canada. But yeah, Scorpions was on that as well. So yeah, there's my second choice. And again, it kind of fits because there's not a whole pile of these big famous second wave bands out there in the world. There's UFO, Scorpions, Priest, Rainbow, and this is one that is at the heavier end, heavier than UFO and Thin Lizzy. So just a little closer nudged into the new wave British heavy metal.
Yeah, and I've always said that their Love Drive 1979 sort of predicts where everybody else is going to start going in 1980. They're leaving behind sort of the psychedelic, the Uli Roth jamming, Hendrixy vibe, 70s style stuff. Love Drive sounds like an album that could have been out in 80 or 81. Yep. It's lean, mean production. The songs are really tight in everything. There's really only a handful of other bands that were starting to do that. Maybe Van Halen, you could say Van Halen or something, that are sort of predicting what's going to start coming in 1980, which is eventually going to lead to the whole LA, the whole LA sound and everything. So, all right, well, I'm going to stick in Germany then, and I am going to go with Accept. And Accept, some people don't realize quite how far back Accept goes. Accept, their first album, the self-titled album, was 79 here. It's a little confusing, their early catalog. I know there's like different covers and everything like that for some of these. For these early records, they're still really trying to find their sound. It's sort of strange if all you know Accept for is Balls to the Wall, and then you discover one of these records. It's a little strange because you've got Udo's voice with them doing like sometimes blues rock, boogie rock type numbers. It's just a really bizarre thing. You get their bass player Baltes singing on a couple songs on some of these early records, so it's kind of confusing. Their I'm a Rebel record, which is their North American debut, 1980. I believe this is one of the ones that had a different cover, is even more confusing. They brought in some outside writers. Here's a little 5 Degrees of Separation from AC/DC. They get Alex Young, who is the oldest brother of Angus and Malcolm, as well as George Young, who produced AC/DC. Alex Young is their older brother. He writes the song I'm a Rebel that I don't know if it was originally intended to be an AC/DC song. It sounds like it could have been an AC/DC song, Accept takes it, has, I guess, gets a little bit of minor attention from it, but this is still kind of confused. It doesn't really sound like the Accept that we would know. By the time you get to 1981, Breaker, now they're and also these ones I don't think were on huge labels. This was like Brain Records, which was like a German label. This one, Brain Passport Records for the US, starting to sound more like Accept. You're getting more of what you would expect from Accept mixed in here, but it really all kind of comes together here on Restless and Wild. This is kind of their classic Fast as a Shark, all these other things, and this is where they, in my opinion, really, their metal sound comes together. And then, of course, you have Balls to the Wall, which is the album that breaks them big on MTV. I wish I had thought of this thing with the way you're mentioning how they, with touring and stuff like that, because I don't really know how much. I mean, I know Accept did land on some of those. They were on like Monsters of Rock and everything, I believe, right? But I should have looked a little more closely. I like the fact that you're talking about how some of these bands toured over in the UK. I don't really know, maybe you do, how much Accept got out of Germany or how long it took them to sort of get out of Germany.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on exactly when and how long the tours were and that. One thing I do want to say about Accept, though, with Breaker and Restless and Wild, it's kind of a little bit like the Scorpions thing, where all of a sudden the reputation of German bands, and there weren't that many, but it just went through the roof, because really even Breaker is so well recorded and technical and fast. Yeah. It's actually even better recorded than Restless and Wild, but the writing is better in Restless and Wild. I mean, those two records were essentially and for that matter, bring in Animal Magnetism and Blackout. But those two Accept records, if you want to keep it with a baby band, were as good as any new wave of British heavy metal album by anybody at that point. 81, 82. I mean, you're getting Iron Maiden Killers and you're getting Number of the Beast. You're getting some good records. You got High and Dry. You've got On Through the Night. Basically, that's it. I like to throw in more Blood and Thunder, and I like to throw in Court, Stand Up and Fight, but they're pretty minor and people don't necessarily agree with me. But I think those two Accept records are as good as any of the Iron Maiden albums and any of the Def Leppard albums. They're that good. So all of a sudden it's like hails to the German bands, because they're doing so well. Like they're just turning out these classics. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's only a couple of them, right?
And on Breaker and Restless and Wild, especially Restless and Wild, it's like they're taking this sort of metal template, this Judas Priest, the song Exciter, and they're taking that and they're just tightening the screws a little bit more, making it even more tighter, more precise, more metallic, more, it's just very, fine-tuned, the craftsmanship. They just get very exact with their with their writing and with the riffing and everything like that. And they're one of the early bands to do that. You know, Motorhead was playing fast, over the top type stuff, but it was a little bit loose, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like the song Overkill, whereas Accept comes in and they just tighten and bolt everything down even more and make it this sort of, you know, really shiny, fine-tuned metal tank, like a fast moving machine that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. My next choice is Y&T. And again, what you get here is a little bit of love for Y&T because they put in the work. They had the Yesterday and Today album in 76. They had the Yesterday and Today Struck Down album in 77. Then they went through their label hassles with London, who weren't a very good label for anybody, ask ZZ Top. And then there's a big break, and then they wind up on A&M and they do Earthshaker, which is a great pounding American heavy metal album. And then they've got this one and Mean Streak, you know, produced by Max Norman, this one. So Max Norman is British. The second one is produced by, and this is at Ridge Farm. And then they do Mean Streak, which is produced by Chris Tangerides, but they do that at Fantasy Studios in San Francisco. But so they have these UK connections. But the other thing, again, back to the W.H.M thing and the love of American bands, you know, if you were a heavy metal band, you know, in the twilight years making heavy metal from America, you were pretty much instantly loved by the British press. And Y&T was definitely a band like that. And they're I made a note here, their lighting guy was even named Ian England. And they supported AC/DC in the UK in late 82. They had a headline tour in 83. They played Monsters of Rock. Here we go. Yeah, they played Monsters of Rock in 84 and Accepted as well in 84. So yeah, they're a band. And even, you know, my copy to this day, that's right, my Black Tiger to this day is actually a UK import copy. It's not even an American version of it. So yeah, they definitely had a lot of ties there, and they were beloved there. You know, they probably were one of these bands that maybe out of despondency might even have broken up had they not had some love from UK, because they were just, you know, it was a rocky road for them for their whole career. Really, they never had a gold album, but it was a rocky road in America, and without you know, some support and enthusiasm from, you know, the UK Punters during the new wave of British heavy metal, you know, they might not have been there to make all the later albums.
Yeah, they're another band that people don't realize how long they had been around. They, you know, the average person only kind of started noticing them when they started getting one or two songs on MTV, but they had been around for quite a long time.
Yep.
All right. Well, I've got my next band here is Crocus, and Crocus is from Switzerland. This is one of those bands I just mentioned. One, people don't realize how long they've been around. I think people would be shocked to know that Crocus's first self-titled album came out in 1976. Now, it bears absolutely no resemblance to the Crocus that everyone would kind of start to know with One Vice at a Time and Headhunter. The self-titled 1976 album, for one thing, doesn't have Mark Storace on vocals. It has a different vocalist. It's some sort of weird psych prog light album. I mean, it's just way out there in left field, this sort of weird, you know, psychedelic type album cover. Then by their third album, Painkiller, also called Pay It in Metal. This is another one of these confusing things, different covers for different regions. Tommy Kiefer, not the one from Cinderella, is on vocals, on guitar here, not particularly well. The album is still sort of them throwing darts at a wall, trying to find a sound, maybe every now and then stumbling over a cool riff here and there. It really isn't until Metal Rendezvous 1980, their North American debut, where Mark Storace comes in on vocals, where you start hearing a little bit of the Crocus sound, that AC/DC sound. Here's our third AC/DC connection here. Starts showing up on this record with songs like Come On. Tokyo Nights has a little bit of a Scorpions reggae feel to it. Lady Double Dealer has an nice AC/DC groove to it. But when we get here to Hardware in 1981, they're definitely inching much closer. This is kind of like not quite as heavy as One Vice at a Time, but they're sort of getting closer here. Easy Rocker, She's Got Everything, Burning Bones is a real sort of that classic AC/DC feel to it. Winning Man is a moody ballad that's maybe a precursor to Screaming in the Night. And then, of course, they land in full shape and with One Vice at a Time in 82, at Headhunter in 83, where they start to break nationally. But I think, again, it's sort of their straight ahead, hard rocking sound. I said this earlier, you know, how many bands from Switzerland were doing anything remotely like this? So maybe they, just because they're the only band doing this type of thing, that's how they get the recognition and everything. But, you know, the hard driving sound that they had, this sort of AC/DC sound. AC/DC is beloved by the new wave of British heavy metal crowds. So Crocus is able to, you know, make their way into the hearts of them via AC/DC, if you will.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much they toured in the UK either. This is, again, something I should have looked up and seen, you know, because I don't think they really had any kind of serious, the early stuff was on small labels. You know, I don't think they really had any kind of success until Metal Rendezvous, you know, is when they started picking up some steam.
Yeah, and I remember even in Canada hearing songs from those albums up here. I mean, they were making a dent with Metal Rendezvous, Hardware, and certainly One Vice at a Time was a pretty big album. And you know, Tony Platt's working with them and all this stuff. So yeah, they're definitely an honorary new wave of British heavy metal band. And the other one that's almost identical to them that fits in the same way, life cycle, everything, is Rose Tattoo from Australia. Yeah. They're the other AC/DC kind of band, right? That fits right into this whole thing. Angel City a little bit as well, the Angels, but Rose Tattoo and Crocus are just like the baby AC/DCs that completely fit in there. So, all right, my last choice, another bit of an odd one, but I'll explain. Rush. So here's Moving Pictures, and I'm showing this for a reason because, again, Permanent Waves into Moving Pictures. This is where these are considered two of the strongest Rush albums. Obviously, this is the biggest, you know, pretty much wins the polls as greatest Rush album. And it's right there, Johnny on the Spot, 1980, you know, going into the new wave of British heavy metal. And I picked them because number one, you know, they played there. There was the classic tours with, let's see, we've got June 80, almost every night of June 80, they played there with Quart supporting quintessential new wave British heavy metal band. April, May, UK and Europe I think this is 79 with Max Webster supporting, and people fondly remember both those bands from those tours. Something I haven't mentioned yet, because this pertains more to the actual bands that were from there. But the other thing for me that makes you part of the new wave of British heavy metal is lots of picture sleeve singles and 12-inch singles and colored vinyl and all that kind of stuff. And Rush, even though they're a Canadian band, you know, some of the quintessential Rush singles and EPs that people think about are the ones that are actually UK versions of these things, songs from Moving Pictures. So they fit in there. And the last reason Rush is sort of fitting in here is, well, they were beloved by everybody. I mean, the critics loved them, the fans loved them, and the bands loved them. This is a key point about the new wave of British heavy metal. Rush is one of kind of the biggest, or not biggest, but big influences on this whole thing, because progressive or new wave of British heavy metal has a fair bit of an epic progressive metal fantasy bent to it as well. It goes through some of the big bands, probably most notably Iron Maiden, but also a lot of those 7-inch singles and smaller bands, you know, have the slow, moody, epic, dirgy songs that get heavy and got the progressive parts in them and stuff, and a lot of kind of Rush lyrical type themes. So I think Rush is probably the one band that you know, and Rush is pretty close to Judas Priest in that respect as well. You know, Judas Priest, people argue they're a progressive metal band, right? But Rush is squarely the band that invents progressive metal. But you could say Judas Priest is a bit in there as well. And like I say, you know, one of the you know, stronger spokes of the bicycle wheel of new wave of British heavy metal is this slight progressive metal thing that happens with a lot of new wave of British heavy metal bands. So I think that's a reason they belong. 4 nights at Wembley Arena, May 83. When it comes to Signals, they recorded A Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres at Rockfield. So they're Anglophiles. They're recording albums there. And when you're recording albums there, you know, you tend to get a lot of press and you do interviews, and they're in-person interviews, and you're around and you talk about the UK and all that kind of stuff. So they have a lot of ties to the UK. And, you know, this is a band that also doesn't have a lot of ties to a lot of different countries. You know, Rush famously have this big career that is very based in America, even though they're a Canadian band, but UK in terms of, and somewhat mainland Europe. But, you know, anywhere outside of America and Canada that you associate Rush with, UK is pretty much the first place that comes to mind.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, for my last pick, I have Twisted Sister, the American band, and Twisted Sister sort of has an interesting history with England. They went over there. First of all, Twisted Sister has been around a lot longer than a lot of people realize. They were kicking it around on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey club scene for ages as a cover band, and doing covers and originals and doing originals. Had a massive following, couldn't get signed. They went over to England in '82 and played with Motorhead on a big like outdoor festival. And you know, they were pretty nervous about coming out and playing with the makeup on and their outfits and everything. But Lemmy totally embraced Twisted Sister. Dee Snider always talks about how Lemmy came out on stage before they were supposed to come on before this festival, introduced his band, basically giving them, you know, the Lemmy Motorhead stamp of approval. Lemmy being a, you know, godfather of sorts, highly respected figure in the new wave of British heavy metal. So Dee Snider always talks about how, you know, it was Lemmy and Motorhead that won them over to the English audience. Couldn't get a record deal in the US. They do go over to England. They're playing some shows. They're getting some attention. They get signed to Secret Records, a small record label over there. They release an EP called Rough Cuts. This is, again, you know, N.W.O.B.H.M bands like to release singles and EPs. It's got 4 songs on it, notably early versions of Under the Blade and Shoot 'Em Down. And their first full length, Under the Blade, was also on Secret Records in '82. It was recorded in London. It was produced, we'll put that in quotes, by Pete Way. The guys in the band mentioned that, you know, Pete Way basically was just showing up and passing out on the couch in the recording room. They don't know quite how much he was there, but his name was associated with the thing. He was there. I guess he did give some input. Pete Way, of course, bass player from UFO, highly respected British band and influential band. This album would go on to be re-released and remixed by Atlantic in '85 after Twisted Sister Mania explodes with MTV and Stay Hungry. And then in '83, we get You Can't Stop Rock and Roll, which is recorded over in England. And again, you know, it's almost like Twisted Sister early on in their career is having more success over there. And even though a lot of people know Twisted Sister for the makeup and the crazy outfits, if you see early images of them without it, they are pretty much, you know, straight up jean jackets, denim and leather type of guys. So in this respect, at least with that look, you know, they fit in. I always say, I think they should have gone with this look. They, to me, look different enough. They stand out enough, you know, just in this type of look. I didn't think they needed to do this. But anyways, that British connection there, them basically getting their start over there, getting signed over there and everything, and getting their career started before they broke big here in the US. That's why I have Twisted Sister as an honorary new wave of British heavy metal band.
Yeah, that's perfect. And as the rose tattoo is to Crocus, Manowar is to Twisted Sister as well. That's another New York band that had the same kind of thing, to the point where they named an album "Hail to England." Right? The whole thing. But yeah, I agree with you on the look. I never liked the look. I don't think it looks good. I think it looks basically stupid. It always looks stupid to me, right? It's essentially a kind of a slapdashy early
New York
UK
Dolls or
look.
something, you know. Yeah.
Well, more like Sweet you know, more like Sweet and Slade. It just like, it's almost annoying. It's an annoying glam look, right? New York Dolls, you would look at that and go, that's pretty impressive. Like, that's classy and tasteful, and that's amazing. And they look like they're in drag, and wow, they did a pretty good job of that, right? And it had an artistic bent to it, but the whole Sweet Slade Twisted Sister look, it just sent off too many confusing signals. It just didn't look right. But you're right. Yeah, that's showing those pictures. It's amazing. Yeah, I think they would have probably would have done better without the look then. But then you wonder, you know, you get up to Stay Hungry, and it's like, did the look help them now at this point?
Yeah, especially with the MTV and the cartoonish videos and everything that they had back then. So maybe the look, that crazy look, maybe helped them in America, but the denim look probably would have maybe helped them go farther in the UK, or maybe, you know, I don't know, who knows? All right, well, there you go. There's our pick for honorary new wave of British heavy metal bands. Let us know in the comments down below what you think of our picks. Some bands you'd like to mention. There's others, you know, we could have gone on with other bands. And if you want to learn more about the new wave of British heavy metal, I highly recommend Martin's books here. The links to his website will be down below. Martin, I'd like to thank you again for joining me here at The Lair.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was fun. This was cool.
All right. Well, thanks again. And until we see you all again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.